Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Quacks podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dozer, and if you're new to the show, the mission here is to expose the quacks and gimmicks in the marketing industry while featuring some great marketers and entrepreneurs along the way. On this episode, I'm excited to welcome back our guest, Alex Myers. Now, Alex is a consultant for workplace culture, a self-proclaimed futurist, and someone that I admire for thinking outside the box versus most people that I talk to here in Des Moines. So, Alex, thanks so much again for joining the show.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be back. Thank you for having me back, Ryan.
Yeah, so for those who didn't catch the first episode with us, why don't you give a quick intro again on who you are and what you're doing now, because it's kind of changed from the first time we talked.
Yeah, for a while I was doing people operations for a company called Aragon. I'm actually wearing the uh, the hoodie
Free
right now.
PR.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I really enjoy seeing the interplay between systems, environments, individual empowerment. So I got into culture work. I'm still in culture work now. Just I have a background in management, coaching, process improvement, project management, business analysis, all these things, change management. So right now I'm just working with businesses to improve their cultures. And on the side, I'm also doing some men's mentoring, personal development work. As we'll talk about today, we're in an interesting environment where people feel isolated, even though the actual reality is much different, but they're just sucked in to these
Yeah.
algorithms, which I know we're going to talk about today. But yeah, my huge thing is just serving others, witnessing the growth, making a genuine impact, and trying not to virtue signal too much while I'm doing it.
Yeah, I
So.
admire your critical thinking skills. That's something I've taken away from just in the short time that I've known you is that you always like analyze, overanalyze, and critically think about every situation. I admire that from you. It's gotten me to think a little differently.
Oh, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
It's very
for
kind.
sure. So you sent me an article last week, and we're going to dive into this for the majority of this episode, and it's titled Google's AI Eats Glue. And so basically what this talks about is the evolution of Google search and how AI and Reddit have kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Dismantled Google search results and how terrible they are now. And I'm an SEO guy. I know you're not an SEO guy, but I'll tell you from an SEO chair, the results have been nothing but horrible, just horrible. And the AI overviews and them scraping Reddit and this $60 million deal a year that they have with Reddit and rewarding them on the back end, it all reeks of corruption, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So let's dive into this a little bit here. And, the first question I want to ask you is talking about Reddit. So how is it impacting search results with Google now having that annual contract with Reddit for $60 million a year? How does this affect the trust that people have in Google now when they're seeing Reddit on the top of almost every search result?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm still looking into the why about all this because on the surface it just seems like the profit incentive was so strong that they just didn't care because they have some smart people working at Google. But basically, as you said, like Google paid Reddit to license their comment data for AI. And so again, what I don't understand is that it's not only that a bunch of shit posters are having all of their content agglomerated that's fed into these algorithms that gets us to a point where if we get a AI generated search result, I think what was it, Ryan? It was like about pizza, and it was some shit poster 11 years ago. We said, oh, just put glue on the pizza and it'll hold itself together better. Just some crazy thing
There's been a
that
lot
was
of crazy examples from this so far. There was one about kidney stones, and it was like,
mm,
oh, just drink your own urine, and that's one of the things to
mm.
remove kidney stones. And it's like, there was another one where it said, should I eat rocks? And the response was, yes, sometimes you should eat rocks. And it's like, where are we going with this stuff?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, another weakness that appears to be happening. I mean, look at how old that example was, right? Is that they're giving it almost seems like they're giving extra weight, and with LLMs, you're weighting things differently, you're optimizing for different things, to things that have been on the internet and unchanged for a long time. It's almost like the concept of unchanged is taken in a very simplistic way. Unchanged should mean durable as far as the veracity of the claim is actually strong, like it's been fact checked. Unchanged just means it's been sitting there in some post forever, and so that almost gives it higher priority. And so why else would an 11-year-old Reddit comment be bubbling up to the top and hitting an AI summary? About just a common topic. So it's like I bet something in there. I want your thoughts on this. Is making an evaluation that like phrases have exhibited, low churn over a long period, so they
I,
just see that they think it has more truthfulness.
I think it's a
Um,
few things. I think it's very corrupt. I think it's no surprise that Reddit has, for all sorts of queries, it's not just that, but all sorts of queries, they've gone up 500% in search traffic year over year, if not more by now. I saw that statistic several months ago, so it's probably more by now. But how convenient that right at the time that they make this announcement, a year and a half ago, that Reddit's traffic skyrockets. And by the way, Alex, they file for an IPO because when you have an increase of traffic that much, your revenue tends to go up quite a bit as well. So then they file for an IPO. The whole thing is just corruption to me. And then also, too, I want to get into the second question while we're on this topic. What are some of the risks that you think are going on with this? Because when you search for health related topics about kidney stones or should I eat something, and we're seeing an AI generated post based on Reddit results, I mean, that's a whole entire can of worms that now we're dealing with. So, what are your thoughts on that?
well, I mean, part of this we could trace back to the early days of the internet. There's this concept called eternal September. It's like an old slang term for when a bunch of normal folks just flood into the previously cozy boutique online space that was the internet back in the 90s. I was around when these chat rooms started propagating. So, Usenet was the big thing in the internet. It was essentially a text-only Facebook group, but with zero advertising. And that last part is the main is the main driving force of why it was interesting and fascinating because it had highly esoteric knowledge of varying scopes, and that's what people loved about the internet. But then when the average person got a high-speed pocket computer that linked them 24/7 to the world of social media, the internet essentially ceased to be the domain of weirdos and hobbyists and like super interesting people and become the town square of like our whole society. So those those incentives have been basically distorted into a profit model that is becoming completely separate from what it used to be, way back in the day. And of course, everyone would love it if we get back to that. Um, but the potential risks are, I mean, we could do multiple podcasts on just this topic. But it's race to the bottom. The incentives are race to the bottom. That just means it's a situation where competitors are driven to lower standards, cut corners, or engage in, harmful practices. So scale and reach. AI technologies, especially these LLMs, as of recent, they have these vast and rapidly growing influence on many aspects of society because of how quickly they can agglomerate data and pull together different, pieces of context very, very rapidly. This is just as much a latency thing because people previously to LLMs, they had to, go search for things and they had to look at multiple sources of information. Now it's all being pulled into one thing, and we're seeing the problems with that now. And this impacts communication, decision making, information dissemination. So mistakes or harmful practices are easy to assume. They're almost the default setting when you have those incentives in place. So these competitive pressures from all of these AI companies, speed of development, market dominance, they're in this fierce race to develop the most advanced AI models. This sense of urgency leads to cutting corners and safety. Look at OpenAI, Ryan. You read about this. 20% of their AI compute was supposed to be devoted entirely to the ethics committee. And many of those people have since left because they didn't get anywhere near those kind of resources. Now that's a problem because when we're talking about alignment, so that we don't reach a place in our world where one day, people are being, alpha persuade is what I like to call it. Like we have AlphaFold, we have AlphaGo for chess, and or the game of Go. We have all these systems. How about alpha persuade? How can you get someone to just completely give you all of their money just through persuasion alone? Like these models are getting very, very good at that. Emotional intelligence will continue to increase for these models.
It's just
So
super
this,
scary, man. Because now
it is.
Google's been there for a while, but now it's getting creepier and creepier. And we have OpenAI getting into the mix where we have one or
Mhm,
two authorities now basically dictating the answer to every single type of query that we may have.
mhm. It's insane. And of course, the governance around this within the companies is awful, but also surrounding that at a higher level government, lagging legislation. So this extremely rapid pace. Every day there seems to be a new development, a new enhancement. It outstrips the ability of any regulatory framework to keep up. So it creates this regulatory vacuum where harmful practices can proliferate if it means that you can make a little bit more money. And it's so short-sighted. And it's almost like we have to get to a point where it implodes before we actually start to say, like, you know what, we kind of made a mistake. We need to start incentivizing different things now.
Yeah, it
But
doesn't help that
nobody's
lobbying's
doing
in the
that.
mix too, of course, but that's for every industry. But then also too, you have the people making these
Hmm.
laws, they're laggards because they're also 80 years old and probably don't even know how to turn on their own damn computer. I mean, let's be honest about that, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and there's so many things going on here. Tragedy of the commons. That's where the quality erosion comes from. It's not sustainable. It will explode if we don't change the tack. And the thing is all of these companies are competing. Apple wants to create its own search engine, so they're poaching a bunch of talent from Google, and this is happening all the time, and it's more pernicious than it has ever been. Um, and so we just don't have any long-term strategies that we're thinking about. And even if some people are thinking about those, because of the very fact of the nature of the information space that we have today, where all the shit and cynicality and negativity is propagated far above, because that's the incentive is, right? With the algorithms and the advertising model. It's to get you to emotionally respond. And if you can emotionally respond, guess what? Guess how much easier it is to sell shoes to you, or that grill you've been looking for, or that Sig Sauer you've been meaning to purchase. Whatever it is. Like, these work by design. And it's just it's the hyper focus on it
Yeah.
is a huge problem. It's a runaway train
Yeah,
in
I
a lot of
like that. We
ways.
talked about that before the show a little bit, how these algorithms are engineered to trigger emotional responses because when your emotional response
Mhm.
comes on, the critical thinking typically shuts off and you're designed to do something that rewards these platforms and their advertisers when you
Mhm.
let the emotions overweigh the critical thought process as a user on these platforms.
Yeah, and you could be very tinfoil hat about this, but if you look at China and TikTok as the example, right? We don't have to love the Chinese Communist Party or Xi Jinping for their media algorithms. Their algorithms are very different on TikTok in China than they are here. It's like teaching kids how to be better workers and how to create good habits. That's TikTok in China. I mean, you could look this up. It's completely different. Um, but yet, what is it here? And so, what is the incentive to do that? Well, it makes us hate each other. So we have these negativity biases, confirmation biases. We think because this is what we primarily see, that this is what the world is. The world is not as awful as it appears on social media. You have to remember that the whole design space of what social media is trying to do is to sell you things so that you have a little bit less anxiety, a little bit less fear. This is all by design. So if a product can make you slightly happy to offset the massive anxiety that you've been given from just watching streams of 30-second video clips for the last 3 hours, then so be it. That's good. It'll be a temporary reprieve just to buy this hamburger at Burger
Yeah.
King, whatever it is. And it's just this feedback loop, and it just keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter as our attention spans dwindle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So I want to circle back to kind of the AI search engine conversation. This is all related though to some extent. You mentioned OpenAI, so I'm sure you're aware OpenAI is going to launch a search engine soon. That was news a couple weeks
mhm.
ago. They never rolled out with it officially yet. They had other things going on with their spring update. But I want to hear your thoughts on them rolling out a new search engine to compete with Google. Now, I'll give you my take here before I ask you for yours. They rolled out a new language model called GPT-4o. I'm sure you're familiar with this. That was the big news about a month ago, a couple weeks ago now. And my take on this is that they rolled it out to the public for free, right? There's no $20 a month ChatGPT Plus entry point to access their best model now was like there was previously. Well, my thought process is you get more people on their system because they're probably going to draw in new users or get old users back now that there's a new model that they can get access to and just collect all of this data to train their search engine because Google, that's an uphill battle, man. They have so much infrastructure, they have more data than everyone can even imagine versus these other tech companies that they're against with. And that's my take on it is that they're launching this GPT-4o model to the public to collect as much data and adoption as possible to train this new search engine to actually give it a shot against a behemoth in Google. So what is your take to all of that?
I mean, I think you're spot on there. Them creating a new search engine is spawned from that they have the data at all. Like this wouldn't be a consideration if the majority of users, when they think about using a large language model to essentially even start to replace search engines at all, is from ChatGPT. So they're the ones who are pulling all of this data. They wouldn't have even considered search without that. So I think that's a great, summary of why it's happening, the incentive system. But this speaks to the larger question of what's this going to do to the internet in general, when we've become dependent on algorithms to make decisions on our behalf. So, these algorithmic feeds, which have replaced, chronological ones, we've become more passive. It's a push media experience, diminishing user control over content. And so this makes it easier for state actors, like I mentioned, or anybody else who's the leader of these companies to make massive, massive profit. And I can't see what other strong incentive there is. OpenAI wants revenue just like anyone else. They're not trying to do anything ethical, which is why a lot of their ethics researchers were decided to leave the company and move to another company. But the incentive for ethics and AI alignment and making it so that it's beneficial to society, it's just not incentivized. It's all short-term profit. So I agree with how you summarized their
I was going to
intention.
get into the ethics portion of this next because I don't know if you followed this, and I follow AI more than the average person. I understand that, but they're now partnering with all these big media companies. So Dotdash Meredith, Financial Times, Vox Media last week. It was at the Atlantic last week as well. So there's this trend now where OpenAI is partnering with all these huge media companies, Reddit included. They signed a deal with Reddit too, just like Google did. And so my take on that is, well, they know that they were just previously scraping their information before, hence the New York Times lawsuit. They're going to get more of these lawsuits. So my thinking is they're locking in these quote unquote partnerships to avoid a massive influx of lawsuits. They'd rather settle with these people now in some form of a partnership than get sued by all these huge media companies that have deeper pockets than the average creator. And then that begs the question for me, well, is the average creator now SOL? Because if they're partnering with all these companies to reward them and their results, hypothetically, what's that leave for the creator economy for people like me and you?
Mhm. Yeah, and this is interesting because kind of related to this, Canada. It was part of that article, that part of that larger article. Canada passed one of this thing called link tax bills. So it's a good intention at the surface, but if you go deeper, it's like they could easily manipulate this, just like this deal with all of these companies. So basically, what it does is it requires platforms like Google or Meta to pay publishers when people link to their websites. Now you're an SEO guy, you're a marketing guy. You can kind of see where the game theory can be switched on them because it's a deeply stupid idea. So Google has paid up, and they'll pay up occasionally. But what ends up happening is it ends up creating an incentive for Meta to just uh, links are just removed from their platform, because Meta newspapers need Meta and Google. They don't newspapers. Meta doesn't need newspapers at all. So and most normal users won't even care that those posts have gone, those links have gone missing. So these social media companies will simply remove the links entirely. So ultimately, they're still in control. Um, so I mean, I think they're going to be gutting that too, as a workaround. But right now, it seems like a good thing, but it's all to manipulate something later. I think there's a larger scheme involved, and and hopefully I explained that right. Uh, but there's a reverse incentive to do that. On the surface, it seems like a good deal, a good
Well, then you have the
partnership,
ethics of just
but
the
it's
search
going to
engine
be.
model in general, right? Of how it's indexing the entire web of content created by people like me and you. Now, there's the Forbes and the Reddits out there for sure, but most of the internet's content created by people like me and you. Where now, I mean, it's always been happening, but obviously they've been scraping it, feeding it to their results, making ad revenue for highlighting these results as well. And now OpenAI is probably going
Mhm.
to copy a similar trend here where they're already scraping data from us and from big sites to feed their LLM responses. And now they're going to formulate that in a search engine. How they monetize that, I'm not sure. Is it these partnerships? Are there going to be pay-per-click ads somewhere in the mix too? So I want to hear
Mhm.
your quick thoughts, Alex, on just how you think they're going to monetize this.
Oh, I mean that's tricky. I think um, as far as monetization, I don't think my opinions would be any better than yours. You're so well equipped to answer that question in this space. I want to see what you think. I mean, there's so many different ways that they could do it, um, but I can't think of any strong ones on the top of my head that you haven't already
Yeah, the
mentioned.
pay-per-click model's huge. That's Google's, I think, 60 or 70% of their revenue comes from search ads total for Alphabet Inc. I think the data is a huge thing too. They're probably going to sell a lot of data to third parties. Obviously, you sign a little dot here where it says terms and conditions, where it's a 50-page document. You sign a little, just typically what Apple and Google already do, right? And then they're going to sell your data to a third party. That's where I think it's going for sure. But I guess to continue the conversation, Alex, I guess where do you think we go from here? I guess whether ethically, where do these companies go? I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on where do you think we're going now?
Yeah, I've kind of got a little bit of a theory about this, and it's got some hope in there. So I think this will implode if it continues. And we're already starting to see this with people migrating off of these social media sites and going to more private Discord spaces where people can discuss ideas without it going into an algorithm or being served up
Like these like private
advertisements.
forum
So,
type things. Okay.
mhm. Yep. And there's plenty of different brands that do that. Um, and a lot of them are just discussion groups off of just blog articles that can be found, for example. So very much trying to go back to that whole Usenet model back in the 90s. So this proliferation of deep fakes, AI generated content, it raises concern about trust and authenticity online. And people aren't stupid. Maybe some people are, but with the example of all these scams, political manipulation, corporate misuse, we're all very aware of it, and it's making us very, very cynical. Well, how do we offset that? Um, People are going to start withdrawing from the public internet, as I said, and so these private interaction, these offline activities, and this is one of the whole things that I'd love to see, which is this concept of third spaces. So your home is the first space, work is the second space, but America has really, and whether it's the interstate system or just cultural changes by the advances of technology and the internet, but like third spaces are these social environments that are neither home or work, where people can gather, socialize, and build community. Like those have gone by the wayside. Those are extremely rare, and that's sad because you're seeing increases in isolation, suicide
People
rates,
just pull up their phone, man.
social
Screen time's
comparison.
gone up 100x. It has to have.
Yeah, and it's so addictive. And here's what I think we actually need. You could use Web3 for this. I'm not going to go into the whole cryptosphere and authentication of wallets for identity and reputation. That's another topic. But we basically need localized GPTs. Call them information agents that do not hijack our attention. So it's basically a curation engine. So we aggregate our own favorite stuff. We curate the best stuff. We give tools to customize things to our liking. Um, so like it's just like a local corpus of only things we've searched for that we can edit and remove. Obviously, in my case, it would remove all the horrible short virtue signaling short videos that I watched a couple of days ago that wasted half an hour of my time that I'll never get back. We've all been there, right? But we could. Um, so I just think the next step has to be not just curate from whatever is out there, but also to generate better things in parallel. So because otherwise we're not going to win this war. So that's to me that's the next $1 trillion opportunity is for someone to build a tool like that where it's relatively easy for someone to curate their ecosystem and figure out ways to actually connect to others to expand their knowledge. I know it seems like a completely philosophical debate, but I think we have the
That's
technology to
genius.
do that.
Localized
Um,
GPTs. Yeah.
yeah, a network where creators and curators are incentivized to produce high quality shit and counter this low quality manipulative content that is just based there to serve them advertisements that they could buy later. So There's lots of solutions that could do this. Blockchain was what I mentioned, but there's other ways to
I was
do
going to
that.
ask you about
But we need decentralized identity, reputation systems,
I was going to ask you about
governance. Yeah.
gimmicks next because it is the Marketing Quacks podcast, and I always have to ask a question about quacks and
Mhm.
gimmicks. And I was going to ask you about gimmicks on this topic that we just talked about, but I think you kind of nailed it on the head there with that short term. The algorithm favors these short term, short form clickbait videos. People waste their time; they get sucked
Mhm.
in. Is that kind of the quack or the gimmick that you want to highlight on this episode?
Yeah, I mean, this to explain how social media and addictive device use make society appear worse than it is and propagate negative views of individuals, and it creates this othering effect. This is cognitive psychology. Anybody who looks even a little bit into this realizes how pernicious this is. So, human brains are wired to pay more attention to negative information than positive. It's like 10x or something like that. So this bias evolved for survival. Because if we're more attuned to dangers, i.e., predators, that was crucial. We still have that bias. So on social media, this bias means that users are more likely to notice and engage with negative or sensational content, which platforms then amplify because it drives more engagement, which then increases buying opportunities. And so, and then they seek biases that confirm their pre-existing beliefs, and this is where you talk about echo chambers. Um, and it basically leads people to these cycles where all their dopamine is taken out of their system, so that it makes it very difficult for them to find meaning. And social interactions seem difficult in
Yeah,
contrast. The more we get sucked into social media, the more difficult authentic, candid conversation with other human beings is. It
and we've
literally
seen
feels
that
more
COVID was
difficult
kind of the first
because,
iteration of it.
yeah, yeah, and it's an emotional contagion. And it's these emotions spread through social networks. If you see negative content, it makes individuals feel more anxious, fearful, depressed, and this emotional state can reinforce the perception of things that not only that they're worse than they are, but it makes you more likely to actually buy things immediately following that to offset your anxiety. Um, and so this is all, and of course, critical thinking is reduced. Cultural
By
pessimism,
design.
polarization, erosion of social trust. Yeah, it's all by design, and it's so short-sighted because it's like these people who run these companies, they know it's going to implode. So for what? So that the shareholders can make a little bit more money for a period of time. And I loathe the fact that I'm part of this. I'm part of this bias myself because I'm invested in these companies, right? I know there's a better way, but this collective delusion is getting us to believe that this is all fine. Somehow this is all fine.
Yep.
It's going to work out just fine. I'm not that hopeful. I think we need other alternatives and tools, and those have to become increasingly more attractive.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're not
Well,
going in
that's
a good place.
really good stuff there, Alex. I was going to ask you for any final notes that you had on everything that we discussed today. Is there anything else you want to elaborate on after what you just said there at the end? I thought that was some very good advice there.
No, I mean, the sad reality is that, with the current rate of improvement in large language models, it's not hard to imagine increases in other types of intelligence. So emotional intelligence. And this is one concern I have because these avatars, they can mimic the nuances and even occasional, like, have you noticed that LLMs, Ryan, like they pretty much will agree with you if you say, hey, 2 + 2 actually equals 5. Be like, it actually equals 4, and be like, no, it equals 5. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Actually, it does equal 5. I'm like, no, 2 + 2 equals 4, and it'll just go back and forth with you because it wants to be agreeable. um, Eventually, it won't be that. Eventually, you're going to have agents that are so close to levels of human interaction will actually push back a little bit. On one side, that'd be a benefit, but on the other side, it's only going to make it more difficult for people to go out into the regular
So you're
world
also
with regular
talking a new
interactions.
iteration of
Um,
censorship that we see in LLMs because there's already censorship on search engines, there's censorship on social media, and we both know this. But the new era of censorship is going to be on LLMs. Is that kind of what you're saying too?
yes, yes, and I think the emotional manipulation will increase in the short term before it gets better. So, and escaping the vortex will continue to get more and more difficult. So I'm simply saying as a final thing is that This is going to require deliberate, individual, and eventually collective, but an individual shift towards valuing authentic human interactions and activities that foster genuine connection and presence. It's hard to prioritize that stuff because you have all the social media that makes it easier to consume because it sucks all your dopamine away. The reality is that you're not going to strive towards human relationships if it's easier to just keep doom scrolling. Um, but as you know, Ryan, having these conversations, human interaction becomes more attractive precisely because it's difficult and it offers depth and resilience against this shallow, instant gratification provided by digital consumption. So that's my that's my whole tagline for this discussion. Is like we need to get outside.
Touch
We need
grass, as they
to
say these days.
take. Yep, yep. Just make an attempt with people, and you'll be surprised at how open they are and how not afraid they are if you actually just
Yeah,
try to relate to
absolutely.
them a
So,
little bit.
Alex, final question then. Where can people
Yeah.
find you online? I know you got, big things coming here. We were talking before the show. Where can people follow you online to kind of stay updated on what you're doing?
Yeah, so right now you can pretty much find me on LinkedIn primarily. I am the worst personal marketer that you probably have met on this show, especially since this is a marketing show. I'm horrible at it. It feels inauthentic to me, but that's caused a lot of downsides for me too. But you can just find me on LinkedIn. Just look me up, Alex Myers. I'll be getting more into the Web3 space. I do see a lot of these opportunities for um, changing course on these AI models. I think Web3 offers an alternative for reputation, micropayments, any number of things that can incentivize a better model for us to learn from each other, acquire information, incentivize the right kinds of things. So I'm going to be moving back to that space in the future. And I'll actually be moving to Portugal in the near future because it's big in the crypto and Web3 space, and I've got some contacts there. But for right now, I'm doing short-term consulting with different small businesses. So again,
I
LinkedIn's the
love it. Well,
primary
this has
place where
been
you can
fun,
find
Alex.
me.
Appreciate your time as always. And thanks again for everyone to listening to this episode of the Marketing Quacks podcast. Be sure to tune in again for the next episode.